Welcome back. All right, so some news of the day for all you fine people for your Tuesday, April the 23rd. Starting at the top of the board with the New Jersey Devils, Timo Meier is having shoulder surgery. Is expected, though, to be ready for the start of training camp. So, again, this is the time of year, whereas first off, the teams the teams that missed the playoffs and then the teams that are out the first round, we find out just how banged up some of these players are. Meier had a really strong run down the stretch, so he did pretty well despite the shoulder. But yeah, so hopefully Meier is ready for training camp and all of that. Now, in Philadelphia, Fedotov, there was rumors that an extension was coming, and apparently it has. It's a 2-year extension, $3.25 million cap hit. It's a lot of money for a goalie with a very short resume at the NHL level. There's not a lot to go on there, though. And as I mentioned, too, the games that he played down the stretch, A, Philadelphia wasn't playing very well. And B, it has to be hard to come across from the KHL, start playing in the NHL. You're not used to NHL ice. Crowds, it's a whole different atmosphere, everything. And then here you go, you're in a playoff chase. So with Fedotov getting a chance to be a member of the Flyers right from training camp through the season, I would expect his numbers to be pretty good. But we'll see what happens there. The Flyers clearly believing in him. I would think it'll be Fedotov and Ersson as their goaltending tandem, but it's a long summer. We'll see what they end up doing and if they make changes there. Andrew Peeke got hurt last night against the Leafs. He's now listed as week to week. When I see that, I think minimum of 2 weeks, which would keep him out for the rest of the series against Toronto. They've recalled Lowry. Lowry, really solid defenseman. I'm glad to see him getting called up and potentially getting into their next game. I've seen a lot of people mad about Ullmark playing last night. I think Boston loses that game if Swayman's in as well. The difference between Swayman and Ullmark statistically has been negligible this season. And so, yeah, I do expect Swayman to be the goaltender in Game 3. But it's weird how they had a rotation all the way through the regular season for the most part, and not a whole lot was said about it. But in the playoffs, that spotlight's there, and people get really mad if you don't go with the goalie that they think that you should. But again, I don't put that on Montgomery. I just think Toronto was the better team. I don't know that anybody was stopping what Matthews was doing last night. Speaking of Toronto, Nylander is considered to be a possibility for Game 3, according to Coach Sheldon Keefe, which tells me he's probably going to miss Game 3. Like, it's clear that with Nylander, this is not just some minor little nagging thing. Otherwise, he'd be in the lineup because there's a lot of players in lineups right now who have little nagging injuries. Again, we find out when they get eliminated just how banged up they are. So for Nylander, the good news is the Leafs are tied 1-1 in this series. The longer they can make this series go, or if they straight out win it, then it makes it better for Nylander and takes the pressure off as well, right? But all the best to him. It definitely makes a difference to Toronto's attack having him in there rather than not. He did have 98 points this season. Those totals are pretty good. Of course, Buffalo going back in time, bringing back Lindy Ruff as the coach. He belongs in Buffalo. He really does. He's been through numerous stays, various places since then, but he should be the coach of the Buffalo Sabres when next season starts and Lindy Ruff's the coach. We'll all go, yeah, that's where he belongs. That's right. And for a Buffalo team that hasn't made the playoffs in so long, getting Ruff back may very well put them over the hump and get them back into the playoffs. We shall see. Lindy Ruff, generally, when he first arrives somewhere, he has pretty good results. And I don't blame him for the Devils missing the playoffs either. I think, seriously, I thought the GM and some of the decisions that were made last summer just hurt the team. And then, of course, there was the Hamilton injury. So, Lindy Ruff, it'll be interesting to see how he deploys players, which guys he really likes, which ones maybe he doesn't. But also, it'll be interesting to see what Buffalo does this summer to try to improve the roster that's going to be out there for Coach Lindy Ruff in the fall. But I'm glad to see they brought him back. It makes total sense for them to do so. So Utah, getting into the discussion of the name, of course, we talked about that yesterday, but the colors. And the Utah Jazz have really fun jerseys, really fun colors as well. And Ryan Smith, the owner of the Utah team, saying that he thinks that, there's definitely some things that the NHL team could use in their uniform design that would come from the Jazz. And so he's open to that. Maybe some of the colors, but saying that it's probably not going to match exactly. I think if they, like you mentioned, the blue sky, so that tells me maybe the primary color will be blue. Be interesting to see what shade of blue and whether or not they end up going with a violet or a purple. And then, of course, if they're going to incorporate a mountain into the design as well, that kind of echoes the Avalanche there too. So we shall see. But Utah, there's a lot of excitement. We're going to talk about Utah again as well in this video. So let me know your thoughts. It's the cat causing pauses. Anyways, so last night, Adam Henrique gets a goal for the Edmonton Oilers. 4,333 days between playoff goals for Adam Henrique. That's a record. The original record, Craig Ludwig had that record for the National Hockey League's longest time between playoff goals. That's a long time. That's a very, very long time. I think it's from 2012. The last time that Adam Henrique had a goal in the playoffs. But, I mean, it's not like the Ducks have been in the playoffs in quite some time. That's where Henrique's been. And so, I mean, the math checks out, but I think Henrique's been a good addition for the Edmonton Oilers as well. Pretty strong run. Now, if you're a Canucks fan, if you're not in a state of panic right now, well, maybe sit down. Demko's not at morning skate, and so that's what I saw about Demko that I put on the board, but now Elliot Friedman's reporting he's questionable for the rest of the series. So I do think this is probably related to the knee. My guess is that he's come back, he's probably 85-90%, and they're thinking to themselves, a Demko at 85-90% is still better than DeSmith or Shelov's. But if Demko ends up missing the rest of the series, then I don't see how they beat Nashville. Just because you've got Saros at the other end of the ice, these teams are quite close in terms of their play. And Demko versus Saros is the matchup we wanted to see, but that's why I've got the panic face there, because if we see Demko hurt for the rest of the series, my expectations for the Canucks do drop, because Demko's a really, really good goaltender, and clearly the Canucks play better when he's in the net. So fingers crossed on that one, but it definitely looks like when I see questionable for the rest of the series, at the very least, he's highly unlikely to be playing tonight. So we shall see, but I think the panic face is probably the best way to look at that, because it'd be like if the Jets lost Hellebuck. Like, you're not going to panic with Bressois, but it's not Hellebuck. And in this case, you're not going to necessarily panic with DeSmith because he's had some good games, but it's not Demko. So we'll see. So the reason why I'm wearing a Coyotes jersey, which, hey, it surprises me too, Craig Morgan reporting, and Jeff Merrick's already jumped on it with, wait, what? So apparently Bill Daly, when asked by Craig Morgan about the Coyotes' history, well, the Coyotes' history is going to Utah because the team moved to Utah. Every time that a team moves, the franchise history moves with that team. It's been a debate on this channel, but it's made sense to me. It makes sense that if you're moving the players, the coaches, if the team is moving, then the history moves with them. Not so fast. Apparently, Alex Meruelo has the history as long as he has the franchise. So, yes, I will echo this. So that includes the Jets' history. It just knocks everything right out of whack for me. I think this is absolutely the weirdest thing I think I've seen from a league that's done some weird stuff. But I do wonder, like, so when they were negotiating to get the team moved to Utah, was this just a matter of Alex Meruelo saying, well, if you're going to take the team, you're going to let me do this, and I'm going to make this and this. Like, it just, that's kind of how it feels. We'll see. But that's odd that he would have that history and that it includes the Jets, which means that, yeah, Utah then becomes an expansion team without an expansion draft, which it's, and I wanted to make sure I put this on the board just to make sure I didn't forget when I get to this part of the board. The first year that the National Hockey League existed, so it went from the National Hockey Association to the National Hockey League because they hated Eddie Livingstone, and they couldn't figure out a way to get rid of Eddie Livingstone other than to completely change the name of the league. So Eddie Livingstone had the Toronto franchise, but they decided, we don't like Eddie Livingstone, so we're just going to take his players. So the players for the Toronto Blue Shirts got taken to the Toronto team that became the Arenas, but that first year they didn't have a name, but they were officially an expansion team, even though the players were the same, the coaches were the same, everything was the same. They were even in the same city, wearing very similar jerseys to what they'd worn as the Toronto Blue Shirts, but it was technically an expansion team. That way, Eddie Livingstone, he fought them in court, he lost, but that way they got rid of Eddie Livingstone. This is the opposite. Meruelo is like Livingstone kryptonite, where he's lost the team has moved, but he's kept the history. It's odd, it's weird. That's why when they talk about, well, you know, the first year Toronto team won a Stanley Cup, yes, technically, sure, but it's the same players that had been the Toronto National Hockey Association team, which was still pretty good that year. And then, of course, the NHL formed because they didn't like Livingstone. So I don't know. Maybe the National Hockey Organization's about to be born, and just Meruelo keeps the. I don't know, but it's strange. It's really strange to me because no team in NHL history that I know of has had their history stay in one location while they move to another. So it tells me that this was basically the NHL going, fine, we need to move the team, and working on, making some compromises. But now for Winnipeg fans, if you want to chime in and say, so can we have our history back? I will 120% agree with you. That's right. I will agree in a mathematically impossible way that yeah, that's what should happen now. If the NHL is going to have a Coyotes history that, again, so if he doesn't get the building put up in the next 5 years, then what happens? Because I've seen that comment too. Like, okay, so does the history just stop if Meruelo doesn't get the building put up and if he doesn't sell the team to somebody else? If he sells the team to somebody else, does that new owner get the history? I would think yes. And then the question becomes why? So I have some questions. I really have some questions because, again, teams move. Like the Minnesota Wild don't have the Minnesota North Stars history. The Atlanta Thrashers history belongs to the current Winnipeg Jets. So if there's a new Atlanta team, they don't get like the Atlanta Flames history back or the Atlanta Thrashers history back. And yet, because the name's still going to stay the same, which doesn't make sense either, because then you get the Jets. It's odd. This whole thing with Arizona moving to Utah has been strange and weird, and now the team's not even going to have a real name necessarily by the time we reach October. It'll just be the Utah NHL team. I guess you just put Utah in diagonal. You just do the same thing the PWHL's done, I guess. But it's weird. It's bizarre. And so we'll see what the next step is. But again, if he's going to have the team history of the Coyotes, then he should give the Jets back theirs. And then the Jets should take that Thrashers history and offer it to, I don't know, if Anson Carter's group ends up getting that Atlanta team, offer it to him. It's bizarre. It kind of broke my brain a little bit where I was like, wait, how does that work? Because I've heard like Utah's basically being seen as an expansion team. But here's the problem with that too, is that then when the Coyotes are, let's just say the building gets put up in 2027 and they reactivate the team. So if it's a reactivated team that was inactive, are we going to have a regular expansion draft like Seattle and Vegas had? Are we going to have some other kind of draft? Will players in Utah have the choice to go back to Arizona, and then Utah would get compensated via draft picks or other players in an expansion draft mismatch, similar to when the Minnesota North Stars and San Jose Sharks did their thing in the early 90s. I feel like I need to do a video on all this because, yeah, there's some oddities with this, and this to me feels like when the San Jose Sharks came in and there was this weird expansion element to it that involved the Minnesota North Stars, an established franchise. So what do you think the NHL is going to come up with? What kind of hybrid expansion, relocation, reactivation, zombie-like state are we going to see franchises in? I have no idea what's going to happen here, but fascinating that Meruelo he has the history, so he has it. Like not the like it's strange to say, well, Meruelo, why? How? Anyways, let me know your thoughts in the comment section below as always. I definitely need to talk about the North Star Sharks thing again, apparently. But let me know your thoughts. Hit like and subscribe if you haven't done so already. Thank you guys so much for all your support. I will talk to you again soon.